Dr. Jennifer Hasenyager, welcome to Conversations with Cabral. It's great to have you on here today.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
So I'm looking forward to sharing your story and also what you do here today as our managing director of our health sciences at Equilibrium Nutrition. So I'm excited that you get to kind of peel yourself back from behind the curtain and really share a lot about what you've done to get to this point, and also all the things that you're doing right now to help thousands of people around the world to discover a lot of their underlying root cause health imbalances. So excited to have you on. And the first question I typically ask people is, when people ask you what it is that you do, since you've done so many things in your lifetime, how do you explain that?
So since starting this position, it's gotten a little simpler because I get to tell them I run a health practice at a fantastic online natural health company. And that inevitably starts a conversation. Oh, what is that? What is it that you do? Which then leads me into more detail, usually about what we're doing and what role I play, which is running all of the basically health services, meaning the lab testing and coaching part of what we're doing here. So, at EquiLife. And so that answer to that question is wonderfully more simple this year. Now, I've been here over a year now. In the past, I used to tell a little bit longer story about what I do, which I'm happy to go into if you want, but that's what I'm doing now.
Yeah, I'd love to be able to really walk people through the journey that you've been on through this particular health space. You are a medical doctor, but you've moved into more of the natural health field. So I'd love to be able to get there. But first, I would like to know, and certainly I know the story, but I'd like to share it with our community and maybe even learn it a little bit more in depth myself. What brought you into the health field, and especially into the field, your original field, which is ophthalmology?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I have a somewhat unusual story there. Unlike a lot of the people I entered medical school with, I didn't grow up dreaming of being a doctor. I didn't have a doctor in my family whose footsteps I was following in. None of that was the case for me. And in fact, when I went off to college, my plan was to get a PhD in genetics or genetic engineering. And at the time that I started college, that was still a very new field. And so I went into college as a chemistry major with the plan to then go on to graduate school to become a researcher in genetics of some sort. And then what happened was I started becoming a chemistry major and doing that work. And when I got about halfway through college, I finally knew enough chemistry to get a job over the summer between my sophomore and junior year, working in a chemistry lab, doing bench research. And I learned firsthand what doing that kind of work was like day to day. And what I discovered was that even though the information and the science was really interesting, the day-to-day life of being in a laboratory was really quite lonely. And I didn't want to, I had a hard time envisioning spending my life, my career, kind of by myself doing work like that, as opposed to being among people. And at the same time that I was having those initial experiences in basic science research like that, I had also begun doing a very interesting extracurricular activity at my college, which was Cornell. And they had a program called the Cornell Ambassadors, which was a group of students who were we were like the primary student public relations group for the university. So whenever the university had a high-level alumni event or some other sort of thing going on at the university where the university wanted some really great students who knew how to talk to people and represent the university, we were invited. So I got to go to these fantastic dinners and receptions and things. Well, that was the beginning of me learning that I greatly enjoyed talking to people, and I really had a knack for it. And so there was sort of those two things happening simultaneously. I was learning that being around people was not only something I enjoyed, but it was a skill that I actually had. And I was figuring out that doing bench science research in the way I had imagined wasn't quite how I imagined it. And it was a little more lonely than what I was realizing I wanted out of life. And so I did some, as best you can at age 19 or 20, soul searching, and realized, okay, I don't think I want to go get a PhD in science. I think I need to figure out a different way to do something in life that fits more of what I'm realizing about myself. So I found myself halfway through a chemistry degree with suddenly no plans to go on and get a PhD. So that led me to, okay, what do I do with a science degree when I like working with people? And that led me fairly obviously into the idea, at least, of going to medical school. And then from there, sorry, did you have a question?
No, I was just going to say, I think this is an important point because there are many different avenues that people can take in terms of health and sciences and medicine. But most people don't realize that when you do get a PhD, you're really in a lab or you're doing work by yourself for the most part or with a small team. So getting a PhD is great. I mean, some people go on to be authors and teachers and all of that's fantastic, but it doesn't necessarily lend itself to working with the general public, nor does your dissertation or anything have to do with that too. It's usually with labs or it's with specific research studies. Now, you could be working with test subjects, et cetera, but it's a little bit different and a little bit more of a sterile-based environment. So I'm glad you brought that part up. And I actually didn't know that about the genetics-based background. Would love to hear too, how that transitioned to essentially being an eye doctor if people don't know exactly what ophthalmology is.
Yeah. So the saga continued as I moved through college, and I still wasn't entirely sure that I wanted to go to medical school. Sadly, not terribly sadly, it all plays out well, but I didn't know anything about other types of natural health, for example, I only knew about the path that basically looked like going and getting an MD. So I didn't even have the knowledge to consider other paths forward in healthcare that I now understand. So that was what I was working with was, okay, people plus science equals medical degree for me. That's what that was. When I was a junior, I think maybe a senior, one of my last 2 years, I happened to take a course to fulfill a basic, like a humanities requirement, but it was a psychology course focused on perception. And in that course, we studied heavily the visual system, and I became fascinated with the way that vision works, the way eyes work, but also the way that the connection between the eye to the brain and the psychology of it all worked. And so as I was making that decision to choose to go to medical school, I was also getting very interested in the visual perceptual system. And then at the same time, the way that the universe tends to serendipitously combine influences, I also, one of my best friends in college, her father was an ophthalmologist. And I spent many visits to her home because I lived far away from where I was going to school, but she lived fairly close. And so I would go for visits on holidays and so on. And her father, as I let them know that I was planning to go into medicine, he took me under his wing, had me visiting in his office. So I was greatly influenced by both my interest in the visual sciences plus this kind of second father to me that was encouraging me to look at ophthalmology. When I entered medical school, I entered very deliberately with an open mind, knowing that there were lots of things for me to consider and learn about, but also with a preliminary interest in ophthalmology because of all that. And then I was able to do research between my first and second years of medical school in visual perception. It was really neuroscience research, but we were looking at how many photons hitting your retina does it take to create a conscious perception of light? And I was one of my own subjects, and I spent many, many hours in a completely dark room, clicking a button when I saw a light, basically. And so I did that research at that time, but then kept my mind open as I went through training to, do I like internal medicine? Do I like general surgery? What might attract me? And as I moved through all of those later years of medical school and really saw what some of those specialties were, it came down for me to internal medicine, which is all about figuring out a mystery based largely on data, lab data, physical exam data, or ophthalmology, which still fascinated me for all the reasons I already mentioned. But then also I had fallen in love with the microsurgery, the sheer beauty of what you see when you look at an eye through a microscope is, it's extraordinary. And there was a lot for me about just the spending my day with that view. Actually, it's just such a beautiful universe inside a person's eye. And ultimately I decided that I wanted to do ophthalmology. So, and it's eye surgery. So that was, but that was a decision I waited until my fourth year of medical school really to make that decision. So that's how I ended up in ophthalmology, and I loved it. I really did. It was a great fit for me. Internal medicine also would have been a great fit for me. And what I ended up doing is as an ophthalmologist, I was often attracted to the types of cases and mysteries that had to do with what we call uveitis, which is inflammation in the eye, which is inevitably related to the whole body. And to now it all connects into the functional medicine and other types of work that we're doing at EquiLife. It comes down to what's the root cause of this inflammation. So I natively was attracted to understanding bigger picture, integrating the bigger picture, even as I was working in that more narrow eyeball size field.
And back then, when you first started out of medical school, you didn't have the background in functional medicine or integrative health. Right. So how were you specifically helping people through the microsurgeries and, in general? Were you doing your fundamental eye exams? What did that look like?
So I was helping my patients in a number of ways. The specific area that I got really expert in was cataract surgery. Mm-hmm. Also some refractive surgery. So I was primarily interested in how can I help somebody see better? How can I help somebody whose eye has begun to change in a way that's diminishing their ability to see the world clearly? What can I do to help them improve their ability to see again? And there's a metaphor there that I find very valuable, but it was also on a very practical level, very satisfying for me to meet somebody who was having trouble maybe seeing their grandchildren's faces and then do something very technical. And then within an hour of my work, maybe seeing that person the next day, and they're already seeing enormously better. The colors are better, the clarity is better, all of these things. That was a joy for me to do that kind of work. But the other way that comes to mind when I think about how I was helping my patients was listening to them. And this was something that often came up against the pressures I was under in terms of the system of working within medicine. That was part of what led me to be dissatisfied with that work. Was there are a number of very, very common eye problems that people come in complaining of, that are really all about figuring out, again, a root cause, or explaining to somebody, listening to them long enough to understand what they might be doing in their life that's leading to this. Usually it's my eyes are burning, my eyes are red, something like that. Most eye doctors find those stories and those complaints very boring and tiresome, and they will just toss an eye drop at that patient and want them to move on. But I always found those patients very interesting, and I always worked at talking to them both to understand if I could fix it somehow for them because they were doing something that they didn't realize they were doing that was causing the problem, or I wanted to talk to them long enough to explain what they needed to do in order to improve their situation, not just throwing a medicine at them. So even when I was in that conventional medical setting, I was already understanding that the connection, the relationship, the listening, the expanding my field of inquiry to understand what variables might be at play to be leading to whatever this thing is. In this case, it was often a red eye or a burning eye. I did that a lot more than most other eye doctors I knew. And I often got, I say this in air quotes, in trouble for taking too long with my patients. I was expected to move on. I probably had an appointment set every 15 minutes that was probably the longest I would have. And it takes longer than that to do what I just described. And so I was often running late. People were upset with me for running late. I was stressed out by that. But I couldn't do it the other way, which was tossing a bottle of steroid eye drops at somebody, which would make them feel better, but it was definitely not solving a problem. It was creating more problems. So those are the two main ways that come to mind for me.
No, that makes sense. And obviously you're doing great work, just like a lot of other medical doctors are doing, whether it's internal medicine, general practice, family practice, ophthalmology, podiatrists, whatever the specialties may be. And again, like that's why I always say, because I know that sometimes I give the medical profession a hard time, and rightly so in some conditions here. Just like you said, throwing eye drops at red eyes or itchy eyes, and not speaking about allergies, food sensitivities, etc. But what I'd like to really understand now, since most medical doctors say, you know what, this is what I went to school for, this is the ultimate answer, and again, like not trying to be negative, but there is a certain ego to medicine, and it's simply the belief that if there was some other knowledge out there, we would have learned it in medical school. And again, I understand that, I get that, and there's a certain there is a certain ego that you do need, because you need to be confident enough to actually perform eye surgery. You need to be confident enough for all of these things. So I get it. Like, there's no doubt about that. But you had a certain openness. And I just wonder, because you're already doing great work. I mean, you're helping people see again. So why would you leave the field of doing great work and say, you know what, this is no longer for me? And how many years later was that? So
I'll answer the second question first. I practiced medicine for, it's a complicated answer, but I practiced medicine outright for 6 years after I completed training, keeping in mind that my training was 5 years and my medical school was 4 years before that. So I was in the medical field for 15 years before I quit doing it day to day. And I was in the ophthalmology field for 9 years. I think that math is right, before I quit doing it day to day. Then for another 5 years after I quit practicing, meaning just seeing patients every day, I continued to teach in ophthalmology, do research in ophthalmology. I was in the international leadership, the American Academy of Ophthalmology. I was in the highest level of leadership there. So that would be in the category of professional society kind of leadership. And I used to joke that I quit doing all the things that paid me anything and kept doing all the things for free. But that's because I genuinely loved what I was doing. The reason that I left was because I got to a point in the last couple of years of my practice that I was dreading going to work, that I was I was really cranky with the people I worked with my family. The only people who I managed to not be prickly with at that time were my patients. I sort of rallied and brought my best to those meetings with my patients, but everybody else around me was getting not the best version of me a lot. And that became more and more apparent to me. And I just got to a point where I realized that as much as I am afraid to let go of this work, and I don't know who I am when I stop being this, I can't keep doing this because I'm turning into somebody I don't want to be. And it's because of this job that I'm doing. So, and all the details of what that was, I'm happy to go into more detail, but that's the sort of simple version of it. Was I got sufficiently unhappy doing my day-to-day work that it was more unpleasant to stay doing that than to face whatever that unknown was that I stepped into by walking away from doing that practice.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I do agree that these decisions do have to be made. And typically, when I'm talking with someone about this, it's making that decision when your essential present moment becomes unbearable, and you just have to, as they say, burn those bridges to just move ahead wholeheartedly while still keeping yourself afloat. So what would be like the one, maybe two things that you just said, I can't go back to work. I can't do these specific things in this field. What was that one or two things, whatever it might be? And then did you already have your heart and mind set on something else? Like, did you already know what the next thing was going to be?
So the one or two things that were, I don't know, the leading issues. One was that what I kind of already described, the way that I felt day to day, where I was under a lot of pressure from the people who paid me, because I was an employed physician. I didn't have my own practice. I was under really regular pressure to see more patients all the time. I was continuously being told, you're not making enough money, you're not earning your keep, basically. So that was part of it, was this feeling of no matter what I try to do, I'm getting feedback from important people in my work world that I'm not doing that right. And that was very hard on me, because it was at that time in my life incredibly important to me that people approved of me. So that was painful. And then also I was, the specific practice that I was part of, there were some political and just situational things going on in which my ability to express creativity in my work, and I'll define that in a second, but my ability to be creative in any way in my work was hampered significantly. And that was related to the specific practice that I was in. What I mean by being able to be creative in my work, in that context of medicine, there's not a lot of room for creativity, first of all. You really are, as a physician, there's certain things that are right and certain things that are wrong, and you kind of just have to do the right things as defined by the medical system. But in the world of surgery, I was a pioneer. I was lucky enough to be trained in a very progressive training program initially. I was teaching surgery to residents. I was teaching surgery internationally. I was at the leading edge of technology and technique for cataract surgery at the time. There were a lot of things that I learned when I went to these international meetings and talked to these international colleagues that I wanted to then bring back and try in my own operating room and my own surgeries. But I was not in a position of any decision-making power or even power over the budget to say, buy a new surgical instrument or say, hey, I want to try this completely different way of doing cataract surgery. I didn't have, the nursing staff didn't have to agree to do that. I had no ability to implement those things that I so desperately wanted to try and to continue to grow in my work and express my own creativity. So that sense of being squashed as a creative person seeking to up my game, basically in my field, became intolerable for me. So those are the two, I'd say, top reasons I left.
Yeah, that makes sense. So not being able to prove yourself in the way that you felt that you needed to for yourself professionally and then internally, and then also not being able to grow. And those are, I think, many reasons people decide to move on from their current position or actually are unhappy in life. And I talk about that all the time, is that you just don't feel like you're growing. You feel stuck, whatever it might be, in a relationship or spirituality or, body transformation, health. So yeah, I think those are absolutely, normal reasons, at least in my book. So where was the next step for you? You left ophthalmology, you began to serve on some of the leadership boards. You oversaw some of the ophthalmology-based professions. You were teaching, and then you ultimately decided to leave ophthalmology, I believe. What was the next? Yeah. Why was that, and what was the next step? Like, what interested you at that next level?
So yeah, it's a great question. So as I was having my last day of work as actually being a practicing ophthalmologist, I had no idea what I was going to do next. And that was very, very hard for me, but it was also, in hindsight, extraordinarily valuable for me to learn how to walk away from something that I was so invested in. A major part of my identity was that. It was what I had worked for my entire adult life. And I had to walk away from it, and I had to do it without knowing what I was doing next. And that was very valuable thing for me to learn. I had very young children at the time. So one thing I did right off the bat was I continued doing consulting work and some ophthalmology work. So I was still doing a little bit of work in my field, but I mainly was spending time with my then 4 and 6 year old children. So maybe they were a little older, but approximately that age. So I gave being a kind of stay-at-home mom a little test drive for a short time. And I learned that that's not really, I'm not cut out to be just staying home, taking care of young children as much as I adore my children, who are not so little anymore. So what I did next then was, well, maybe getting an MBA maybe just getting more education would be helpful in helping me figure out what to do next. And so I did that. And that was valuable because I learned a lot of things. But one of the things I learned through that was, no, I don't really want to go work in a healthcare insurance company or a big pharma. I don't want to do the kind of job that an MD, MBA person would normally be recruited in to do, or, hospital administration. None of those things were really very appealing to me. But again, I learned a lot. I learned a lot of stuff, right? I learned about accounting and finance and marketing too, which is always useful. But it got very clear that going to work in a big, typical sort of expected position was not going to do it for me. I was really lucky that during that same time that I was doing my MBA, I very serendipitously met a person who became an important mentor for me. And his field continues to be counseling, with a specialty in working with people who are high talent, high intelligence. And I saw him give a talk, and I immediately liked the way he thought about things, and I was just very interested. So I struck up a friendship with him, and ultimately became, for lack of a better term, an apprentice to him, because I got very interested in the work that he was doing. Because I had an MD, I didn't have to go back and get any other credential in order to work with people in that counseling sort of setting. And I began to learn, and that counseling tradition that I was learning was what you would call family therapy. Basically, that's the roots of it. But with this angle and this very specific focus on working with people who are high intelligence, high talent, and understanding how that population of people, what they need. And it's a very specific population. And from that, and I'm oversimplifying this story vastly, but out of that came my executive coaching work, which was the next major career title I would say I would give myself. And that began to grow. That kind of came online around 4 to 5 years after I stopped practicing. I'll pause there if you have a question.
No. My question is, I would love for you to define executive coaching, meaning, does this mean you're working with corporations? Does this mean you're working with individuals? And if so, if it's groups, how are you doing maybe the family therapy practice within that? Or what does that look like? I mean, how are you able to help people that are high achievers get to that next level?
Yep, it's a fantastic question. The executive coaching, I worked kind of all of the above that you just said. So I had a practice that was my own business, and I would work one-on-one with typically an executive who was in a relatively high position doing something complex, who was looking to up their game in some way. I used to say that I don't want to work with people who are having trouble getting out of bed in the morning. I want to work with people who are already rock stars, who want to up level somehow to get to the next level or to shift something. Maybe they're doing this and they want to do this, but I wanted to work with people who were already doing well, because the nature of the work that I was doing, to answer another part of that question, was I had integrated my neuroscience knowledge, which came from being an ophthalmologist, because in order to be a really good ophthalmologist, you have to be a very good neuroscientist. So what I was able to do through the course of that, learning that new stuff, and this mentor I had was very tuned into also neuroscience, is I learned how to understand the way that people's brains manage information, manage language and communication. And I took some of the skills that you learn when you're around family therapists, meaning the way to interact with people, how to unlearn a lot of the disconnecting behaviors that I'd been trained into as a physician. I had to learn how to stop doing that and to start actually deliberately creating relationships with people. And then I was integrating this neuroscience side, which it turns out with lots of people who are highly bright, they're outliers. If you're a highly bright person, meaning you're above average in some way, you're an outlier. And outliers tend to have other unusual features to their systems, and that's just true of human beings. And so when you have people who, if you, the easiest example is the mad scientist. That's an extreme example where you have someone who's extremely high intelligence, but maybe doesn't remember to tie their shoes. That sort of discrepancy is actually quite common in a less extreme form in lots of fields where you've got people who were high achievers in college and, maybe 1 or 2 standard deviations above the norm in intelligence, but not wildly off the charts. But they're going to have, it turns out, unevenness in the way their brains work and their whole bodies actually, but I'm just going to focus on neuroscience for a second. And so a lot of times you'll have people, and I put myself in this same category, where they may think of really complex things, but then maybe have trouble executing on that. Maybe they have something important to say, but they have trouble communicating it in a way that's effective with other people, whether that's because they actually hang up and glitch up getting the words out, or maybe it's because they don't have a good skill at reading the other person, and so they can get the words out, but they're maybe not landing effectively. There's a lot of subtlety to it. So I ended up creating a executive coaching practice, which was very unusual and atypical. And I tried not to even call it executive coaching for a long time because it was so different from what other kinds of executive coaching looks like. But for reasons that had to do with people just grasping what I was talking about, I called it executive coaching. But what I was really doing was teaching people how to understand the way their brains worked and the way their communication style worked. And I also integrated some psychological principles that had to do with identity formation and a bunch of other stuff. And so I was working at a very sophisticated level with people, but the real secret sauce of what I was doing was teaching them how to understand their own language processing, the way that their brain managed in language, inbound, hearing other people, and outbound, expressing themselves. And I applied that in individual sessions, but I also applied that in groups. So I would go and work with maybe the leadership team of a company, and I would go and I'd sit with them in their leadership meeting once a week, or usually more like once a month, and watch what they were saying and how they were doing it, and then help them to break down where each of their individual language processing or communication styles was playing into a dynamic that was getting in the way of them having a better collaboration, things like that. So I worked with groups, I worked with individuals, and I, as you can tell, I'm passionate about that work. It's endlessly fascinating. People's brains are endlessly fascinating. And so that is what that is. And that's work that I still am very interested in. And I take that skill set into the work that I do now with the team at EquiLife.
That's great. And our actual IHP's Integrative Health Practitioner Institute, when we did our event in Australia, luckily we got that in about 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. Our IHPs there, I think we had an event, a small private group in this beautiful setting, really, really nice, about 50 people or so. And you actually took people through some of these exercises and getting people to understand what true active listening is and engaging themselves in the conversation, being present, and those types of things absolutely needed for high achievers, health coaches, but anyone out there can benefit. I mean, that's the big thing.
Absolutely, yes.
If you integrate this into your life, all your relationships get better. And so I think it's an amazing thing to be able to really bring out to people. I know that we're teaching that in IHP Mastery a bit more as well, but to me, it still seems like you were on the same path, right? Looking for the same thing. You were that junior in college for undergrad saying, I don't want to work in a vacuum by myself, even if it's great work. I want to be out there working with people. So for you, going into executive coaching is still essentially working on a person's health, this time more mental health and maybe physical, but all of them are connected, right? I mean, you can't have, it's very difficult to have great physical health without good mental health. And that's because the brain, the actual psychology can begin to erode the physiology of your body. So to me, it kind of seems like another manifestation of you looking to help people and help people improve their lives.
Yeah, you're right. You got it. You nailed it. And to me, the through line is connection. When I sit back and look at everything that I've done, one of the through lines for me in my work is connection. And yes, of course, helping people, helping people activate their potential, helping people show up and do whatever they're here on the planet to do is always, if I look back on everything that I've done, that's always what I'm up to, is how can I help somebody see better? How can I help somebody in their executive role, whatever it might be. But the part that developed for me was this part about connecting with people. And I sort of understood that early on when I realized in the lab that I wanted to be working with people. Then I took a step that was about 45 degrees off of true north for me, which was going into medicine. I don't regret it by any means, but what I didn't understand about medicine was that medicine is, at least the way I was trained, and I do think it's starting to change, but at the time I was in training, it was still all about disconnecting. It was still all about finding a way to dissociate myself from others so that I could be professional and be effective and you know what, sometimes you have to do that. I really was in situations where somebody was dying or something very, very serious was happening that I had to have my own self together so that I could do whatever needed to be done and not be having a big emotional reaction that took me down at that moment. However, I was trained into an unhealthy level of that disconnection from myself and from others. And what I figured out after I left practice and had some time to kind of calm down from all of that, get out of that environment, and then start spending time with people, the therapist world, where it's all about the reverse. It's all about creating connection with yourself and with other people. That was profoundly important for me. And it is what activated my own potential and got me much more aligned with what it is that I'm really here to do. And that's led to me being so much happier in my work, because that was a massive missing part of what was going on for me in medicine in retrospect, was that I was not only kind of just systematically unable to connect with people because of the time factor, but I was trained and I was in this environment where I was expected to be dissociated rather than connected. So all those things kind of hang together. And now as I move forward into my, into the more current now part of my career, I don't know if you asked me this, but I'll just fill in this detail now. Functional medicine came back into my life. So I hadn't been practicing medicine for years. I was doing executive coaching. And then my own health problems took me in the direction of learning about and researching functional medicine. Now, I didn't have the kind of dramatic health collapse that you did, but I had enough unpleasant sorts of health problems that got my attention, and I wanted to sort them out. And so I began learning on my own about functional medicine probably around 2008, or quite a long time ago now. And then over time, gradually was implementing those things just for myself. Then again, serendipitously met somebody who was actually a chiropractor who was doing a functional medicine practice locally here. And she essentially recruited me to come out of medical retirement, if you will, and give a try to doing functional medicine practice in person, one-on-one with patients, like the old school way. And so I did that a few years ago, and I went and I I got all of my training through the Institute for Functional Medicine. And then I began actually physically going into a clinic and seeing patients again. And parts of that I really, really loved. And parts of that, it still wasn't really the right thing for me. So I did that for about 18 months and then decided, okay, I learned some other stuff. That's not exactly the right thing for me, but I really believe in the functional medicine model. And it was right around that time that I saw an email go by about a job opening for an online natural health company looking for somebody to supervise their labs and coaches. And next thing I know, I'm talking to you, and then
yeah, I want to get to all of that, but I also want to hear when you were moving into the functional medicine based fields, because you mentioned something that I think is really important, is that a lot of medical doctors are trained to disconnect, whether subconsciously or consciously. And part of it is because they are dealing with a lot of extremes. I mean, we're talking about acute based diseases and very harsh things that if you were to absorb all of that energy and all of that, and you weren't able to properly handle it, well, that leads to not very good health outcomes for a lot of doctors. And that's why, at least it used to be, medical doctors lived some of the, unfortunately, shortest lives out of any population on the planet. And I think part of it was just the day-to-day stress, of course. But there's also in that we seem to glaze over, because I don't think any medical doctor really likes to practice like this. I have some very good friends that are medical doctors and colleagues, and they're also specialists. And the specialists get to spend a little bit more time with their patients, but general practice, you get about 15 minutes, unless it's that yearly 1 hour appointment or so, because health insurance just won't allow you to do more. That's part of it. And also, if you work for someone else's practice, more patients typically equals more profit, more dollars. So, you'll see 4 people an hour. And I know people, it's not uncommon to see 20 or 30 people a day. And that's just an unbelievable amount of people and problems to come through your door on a daily basis. It doesn't even include all of the electronic medical records that doctors are now, essentially forced to keep up with. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. You should absolutely keep good electronic medical records so that if they ever went to another doctor or specialist, they know exactly what's going on. But you're always liable for everything that's happening all day long, the right prescriptions mixed with this prescription. And that alone is pushing a lot of great, brilliant medical doctors out of practice. But the good news is many are opening up what they call as cash practices. And people think of that. They say, oh, well, that's, bad. Medical doctors are not taking insurance. But if you want really great service, it's difficult to go the insurance medical model way. When insurance came for naturopathic doctors to Massachusetts in 2016, I know many that didn't go that model because they said, okay, now I need to do this, this, and this to be able to accept insurance. And so many kept a cash-based practice and said, no, all of my appointments are an hour to 90 minutes and they're minimum of a 30-minute follow-up. And so a lot of doctors are doing this now from a concierge medical perspective. And yes, it costs more money, but you get the time with your doctor and they are connected. That's what I found. So this kind of brings me back to my point was you can't have this connected relationship with a doctor for 15-minute appointments where maybe 4 minutes on average you're allowed to speak. They get about 4 minutes and the rest is your electronic medical records, right? That is not a relationship. It's impossible to build. And so now what I'm saying is you essentially realized that way back before. It wasn't how you wanted to practice. You went to more connection with the teaching model. So now you're teaching doctors, other ophthalmologists. You're teaching now executives. You move into functional medicine where I'm assuming, I don't know exactly what you were doing, but were you doing at-home lab testing with people or in practice? What did that look like?
I was doing, so that practice was all cash. Which for exactly the reason that you just said, my appointments were my first, new patient appointment was 90 minutes. My regular follow-ups were 60 minutes. So, and I was doing at home labs. We were not doing anything. I was not doing anything with insurance. And we were not doing blood draws even in the clinic. It was truly was at home labs and cash practice for me. And that was good. That was set up exactly the way that I wanted it to be. Now, I did order some blood labs, and people would sometimes go get their blood drawn and do it that way. So I was integrating some blood labs into that, but and they could use their insurance for that. But I was keeping it very simple and and I was staying far away from insurance, again, because of this struggle, which is that once insurance gets involved, then there's a third party that has the ability to attempt to at least dictate the way that I'm doing my work. And I wasn't willing to go back into that situation, because what you were talking about before about how difficult it is for conventional medical doctors to do their work for all those years, and that stress. As you were saying that, I was remembering, you asked me why did I leave practice, and I gave you two good reasons, but another good reason was I was depressed. I was struggling. And if I want to put that in the context of how you and I both talk about the whole picture, the overall toxic load on my system that was coming from stress, both sort of just physically exhausted, but also the emotional taxing kind of stress that I was under, because I was attempting to be around all of these patients who, even in an ophthalmology practice, it can be intense. People can be in pain. People can be in whatever kind of distress they might be in. And at that time in my life, I was not aware enough of my own sensitivity to that to manage it in a way that was healthy for me. So that what you were saying hit home for me. And of course, when I was in my training years, oh my goodness, when I was in medical school and internship and really working in hospitals all the time, I had no idea how that was impacting me. I was an intern in San Francisco in 1994. AIDS epidemic was at its height. There were no effective treatments yet. I was in the middle of that storm as an intern. So, and that's just one aspect of what I went through. And so I think back on all of that. And yes, what you just said about the stress and the toll it takes on me as a human being to be doing that medical practice was enormous. And I had no idea about any of that at that time. I just pushed on because the culture in conventional medicine is still a lot like this. It's very kind of macho, male dominated. It's changed a lot. That macho kind of male dominated part has shifted some, but this idea of you don't get to stop to eat. You don't get to go. You don't get to sleep. You don't get to take care of yourself. That's a sign of weakness or not being dedicated or whatever it might be. It always struck me as so profoundly hypocritical to expect that of us and then turn around and claim that we were taking care of people's health. So I always found that to be kind of puzzling. At the same time, when I was going through it, I didn't, after I was in training, there were actually rules put into place to limit medical residents' training hours to something like 60 hours a week. At the time I was going through training, none of that was in place. And so, and I didn't even, the paradigm wasn't even in front of me that I could challenge it. Like, it was so ingrained that nobody questioned that stuff then. So that's just sort of to fill out my personal experience with all of that. I might have forgotten the question you asked me. Oh, did I answer your questions about my
you didn't, and I still, no, absolutely, you didn't, and I still believe that there is that bravado in the residencies in medical school. It's almost like a Darwinism, like you have to survive it. I mean, I just know many of my friends that went through residencies, and whether it's 60 hours or not, it seems like it's still, it's like you're tough. Pushing in all day long and everything is dedicated to that. So it's almost like, how bad do you want it? And the nice thing is the people who make it through are fully committed to what they do. But the bad part, not many people make it out like you did. So once you're that committed and you're all in, it's like, well, I did all of this for what? For nothing? And they don't see that they're able to do more, because I really believe that although we have some of the most brilliant minds in the world going to medical school, because it is prestigious as well, that they're helping people with sick care, right? We're managing disease. And it takes something else, and including looking at your own health, to understand that we're not focused on healthcare. We're not focused on getting people healthy or helping people maintain health. We're focused on, well, what do we do when the body's already broken? And that's a real issue. And what we do at EquiLife is something different. We're focusing on, yes, people that are not healthy, that are not well, but also it's, well, what do we do to get even healthier? And really what we're talking about is getting the body back to a place of homeostasis or equilibrium. So I would love now, I did put out that ad. I can remember it now, about 18 months ago or so. I think somewhere around there. And it was actually through the IFM boards.
It was.
I took many of the what are they called, seminars or workshops through the Institute for Functional Medicine. It's a great organization. And about 80 to 90% of the people there are actually medical doctors. So these are actual medical doctors wanting now to learn, what is this thing called functional medicine? And, functional medicine is a little diluted now. You could be a medical doctor who might give some vitamins or some hormones, right? And you're a functional medicine doctor. But, so there's all sorts of different levels to it. But at least the thought behind it is good, meaning we want to get people to not stop running their blood work, of course. We want to continue to do all of the things with your medical doctor. But what if you had a medical doctor and a functional medicine doctor, or a medical doctor and an integrative health practitioner, a health coach, whoever it might be, in order to learn the other side of health, right? So there is the medical side, the conventional medicine side, which you should absolutely still take advantage of, especially since for many doctors, it's covered by your health insurance. But now let's actually learn about health, not just sick care. And so I would like to hear now it will never be the final transformation, but the next transformation as to what led you to where you are here today.
Right. So I had, through that experience doing the functional medical practice, I had furthered my belief that practicing that way, approaching people's health and wellness that way, was the right way to do it. Right way meaning effective, and certainly worked for me personally. And then I watched it work for patients that I was taking care of. So that just confirmed for me that indeed this idea, this approach of a couple different things, but basically looking at the whole person and coming at health and wellness from the preventative and root cause perspective, rather than the sick care perspective, that was all definitely what I believed was the way to go. I also knew enough about myself at that point in time to realize that I'm not really loving going to work every day. There's still something not quite aligned for me here. And I don't know that I could have defined what that was, but I think in hindsight what it was is that I was working in a practice with just two practitioners, and we were often not there at the same time. So there was this element of isolation again that I was back into, that reminded me a bit of working in that lab all those years ago. But when you are a practitioner, you are seeing people all day. But if you don't have colleagues around you, other people to bounce ideas off of, to share with, for me, that feels very lonely. Even though I am with people all day long, there's an element of loneliness that has to do with not having peers. And so ultimately that's just not the greatest environment for me. So I was in the process of relinquishing that practice when I saw this listing for this position that I'm now in. Now, the other little detail that was going on at that point in my life was that I had decided to be trained as a shaman. So I was also spending time during that same time, because I'd taken an interest in the spiritual side of healing, the understanding. And interestingly, the idea to even look into shamanic studies came from my Institute for Functional Medicine training classes, because one of the aspects of that model is spirituality. They very deliberately integrate that into how you learn to look at a client or a patient's entire wellness picture. And so there was actually a mention of this particular shamanic training program in one of my IFM, my Institute for Functional Medicine courses, which led me down a path of deciding to enroll and train in a shamanic program, learning to do energy healing and understand that spiritual dimension of wellness and just of existence more than I had previously. Now, I've skipped over a bunch of other things that I was for many, many years interested in energy healing, but maybe for another conversation. But what I just wanted to put that into the mix because it's part of how I operate to this day. And
I'd like to just, where in IFM, I just, for my own personal interest before, because I do want to obviously get more into that as well. When I was going through the IFM mods, it was still very conventional medicine, but functional medicine, but from a conventional standpoint. And I know that you did it just a couple of years after me, and you went through the full certification, which you actually got certified through IFM, which is great. Yeah. But where did they start to speak about the spiritual side of it? Because I never saw that. Again, I was doing this in 2010, and maybe yours was just a couple of years later.
Mine was a few years later, yeah.
So I'd like to hear that, because I'm impressed that they were talking about that side of it.
They have a model that they call the matrix. So in the matrix, I won't go into all the detail of it, but it integrates all the various, what you would call systems of the body, things like it's not immunology, but like the immune system, the body communication system and the body structural system. They've got a bunch of those systems that they look at. And then they also have lifestyle factors, modifiable lifestyle factors that they integrate into the model. And they also have mental, emotional, and spiritual dimensions to the model. So in that spiritual category, there was a lecture in one of my actually in one of my GI courses was a lecture that was about how a patient ultimately got healed of inflammatory bowel disease through shamanic healing rather than through any medicine or medical care, really.
That's great to hear. The spiritual, so the matrix was there in 2010, but the spiritual part of it was not. So that's really nice to see that they've evolved and added that, especially for the medical doctors. I know that natural health coaches and natural health practitioners will understand the spiritual based side to it and the energy based side to it as well. And when we talk about, maybe just for a minute or so, a couple minutes, you could talk about the energy side, the energetic side to the body and the energetic side to healing, because even in my de-stress protocol that I talk about, diet, exercise, stress reduction, toxin removal, rest, well, those are physiological. Those are pretty standard. We need to look at it. We look at it through a different lens, but then you get to the emotional part of it and that success mindset, which is really, I work with a lot of people that don't believe in the beginning that they can ever be well. And I work with a lot of people that don't actually believe that they could ever be happy, that it's not, happiness is just not in their future, that whether they don't deserve it, they don't feel worthy, whatever it might be. And that actually can be an energetic blockage. There's something there standing in their way, in their subconscious mind. We know that these things exist. That then actually shows up at a cellular level, and they're not able to then, we can help them get well, but they'll always relapse. So what do we need to do as natural health care practitioners to actually help at an energetic level? Share with a little bit about how the shamanism or the energy would then relate to an actual integrative health practice.
Absolutely. So the energy relationship, as I see it, you can look at it from the most basic physiology all the way to the most expanded metaphysical. So from the most basic physiology, you can talk about things like our hearts operate off of electricity, right? That's what an EKG is. Our brains operate off of electricity. The neurons communicate ultimately through electric impulses. That's energy that we measure in an EEG, or even certain types of other brain scans capture that electrical activity. So we have energy in the form of electricity in the most mundane physiology that we all know about. There's also in the physical body, we talk about I'll get slightly more esoteric as I go here. We know about things like acupuncture with the energy meridians that are believed to pass through the body, that are part of ancient of traditional Chinese medicine and various other very long-standing healing traditions. So this is the basis on which acupuncture would be done, or various other traditional types of healing protocols like that. But acupuncture is a great example where you're intentionally stimulating electrical or energetic channels within the body that impact distant locations oftentimes, or functions. Then if you get even more esoteric, you can talk about things like the bioenergetic field, which could be called the aura. But we as living beings, we do emanate an electromagnetic field. This is physics. This is real. And as science has, as especially quantum physics has gotten more sophisticated in the last decades, the physics and the science begins to catch up with these ancient wisdom teachings that have to do with each human being, or for that matter, each living being. A plant will also have an electromagnetic field around it. So what we're learning is that these light energy bodies or electromagnetic fields that we each have around us, those are interactive, and those fields can help us sense things, and they can impact us and other people very, very literally. So a good example is if you are sitting, concentrating in a room, maybe you're facing a wall, and you know somebody's just walked in the door even though they were silent. That's an energetic sense that their field is interacting with your field at a distance. It's quantum physics, and that's a very direct example of how that actually works in our day-to-day lives. People who will describe, my child who's at college, I was in a car accident and broke his leg, and I got a pain in my leg the moment it happened. Like, that would be another example of, if you want to put it through this lens, of an energetic relationship that happens at a much greater distance. But again, quantum physics tells us that interactions between energetic particles, electrons, for example, can happen at enormous distances. There's no space or time in the quantum field. So when you take this into shamanism and healing, the general idea is that our energetic field influences our physical body, influences our emotions, influences our psychology. And we know that our emotions and our psychology absolutely influence our physical body. We know if we get upset mentally for a psychological reason, our cortisol levels will go up, and that can set off a bunch of stress reactions in our body. Similarly, if something happens energetically, that trickles down into our psychology, our emotions, our physical body. So that's the basis of this. Back, thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, there was no medicine, there was no surgery, there was no scientific understanding. All there were healers who had figured out that if you work at this energetic level, you can, in fact, influence people's and alleviate people's suffering oftentimes. So that's the basis of energy healing of all sorts. And it's not just shamanic, it's Reiki would be another example, or any other kind of energy balancing or energy modalities are all versions of energy healing. And I got very interested in how that really does work, because I had some energy work done on myself at some point along the way and found it to be very helpful. So that's why I took that course, and that is the perspective. And I'm glossing over lots of it, but the idea basically is that there's another level of impact on us as living beings that is out here and then out into the universe much more broadly, which is energetic. And it's how people can influence us at a distance. It's how an energy healer can actually help you even without ever touching you. And I'll just pause there for that.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's great for us to know, because you're going through a lot of different types of healing. And really what we're talking about is that humans are multidimensional. So if we're talking about, physical pain, emotional pain, spiritual based pain, and all the different pathophysiologies essentially of the body, meaning like there's multiple ways to get unwell. And then there's also multiple ways to get well again. And so one of the things that we do with our coaching team and in our private practice is that we help people on all those multiple levels. Like that is our goal. So our goal is for sure giving people standard protocols, for example, like the CBO protocol that we know are going to help to rebalance the gut. But what if that person holds their tension from stress in life or trauma in their gut? Well, they're always going to be dealing with then low peristaltic movement. They're going to be dealing with potentially SIBO and other factors that will allow them or cause them to relapse in the future. So while we're taking someone through a protocol that we know works, we also have to be speaking with them about the stress, the emotions, and those types of things as well. And I think that's really what does set us apart. And I'd like to go back now to, why. So right now you are currently the Managing Director of Health Sciences at EquiLife. And obviously that is a title that you've earned. You are the person that oversees our health coaching team, that oversees what we do here, that really works one-on-one with me to decide what labs are we going to go with, what are the different markers that we're going to be looking for, and how are we going to help our health coaches to implement that as well. So, you applied for that ad. You felt that this may be the position for you. Talk a little bit about that, why you decided to join the company. And from my end, I'll let everyone know that we had to shut off our ad after 3 days. So Caitlin was running the ad with me through just one organization, IFM. We got well over 100 applicants in 3 days. Like we had to just stop, from coming, because I believe this is the type of health type of practice that people want to be doing. I really believe that. And we were looking for a medical doctor. Now it could be a licensed naturopathic doctor, medical doctor, whoever it might be, but we were looking for someone to say, okay, this is who we want to run our director of our health sciences. And from my perspective, I had narrowed it down. I can still remember the calls. It wasn't that long ago. And you stood out as the person that was, I believed, a lot of people had great experience in the field of functional medicine, integrative health, but you came at it from multiple different perspectives. And I love the perspectives. I love people being able to understand that what we do is more than just the at-home labs. And it's more than just the protocols. We're working with people. It's people that matter at the end of the day. And that's what I wanted that perspective on. And you obviously had that in a unique way with the MD, MBA, and the background in shamanic-based healing as well. So that to me was very interesting. Even if we don't use any of those things specifically, we incorporate all of it in how we practice. So I would love now to hear your perspective. And, I can say now, hopefully, I don't know on your end, but at least on our end, we made the right choice. And we're thrilled to have you as leading our team, into the future of what we do, because we're just getting started. I'm so excited. I'm excited for what the future holds for all of us.
Me too. And I'll start with that. I am so thrilled to be here and love my job. So yes, it's a mutual affection that we have at the moment. It's just been great. The whole thing has been great. So to go back in time though, so when I did just see an email listing for this, just that I saw that same posting that you put up. And at the time, the posting was for a part-time position. And I was at this kind of, I'll call it a little bit of a still point in my life, because I had decided I was going to stop doing my functional medicine practice. I was still doing executive coaching, which was taking up a little time, but not a lot of time. And I was just about to finish my shamanic training and was looking around to figure out, do I want to do some straight up shamanic healing sessions? Just really, this right here behind me, this is sort of the representation of the shamanic side of me. Do I want to set out to do some of that work? I was in that place, and I see this listing and I thought, oh, how nice. This is a part-time position, so I can do this position, which sounds super interesting and aligned with what I value. And then I can keep doing all these other interesting things I'm doing. And then I started speaking with you, and I had not heard of you or this company at the time. So that was an interesting, I think, position for me to be in, because I really had no preconceived notions about anything. And when I first spoke with you, I had gone and looked at the website, but I really didn't know very much about what you were doing. I just really liked you. And I felt that you and I connected and had a lot of synergy in the way that we think about taking care of people, helping people in the world. And then as the process went further, because I got to speak, we had a few conversations before the final choice was made. Then I began to listen to your podcasts and to look more deeply into everything that the company was doing. And the more I looked, I went and looked at the ingredients in the DNS, the daily nutritional shake. And I really studied what you were doing, because I knew what it looks like to do this sort of thing well, and what it looks like to do this sort of thing not so well. I know the difference. And so I went and looked at what you were doing, and I listened to what you were saying, and everything that I heard and saw, again, lined up with what I believe in and what I know to be extremely high quality, thoughtful, smart approach to this thing we call functional medicine. Or and what you are doing, what we are doing here at EquiLife, is beyond functional medicine. It's far more expansive and integrated than that, because it's not just there's Ayurveda, and there's naturopathy, and there's a bunch of other disciplines that you integrate. So all of that added up for me to believing that you were on to something that was very, very well thought through, very smart, and very well aligned with what I believed to be what was important to me as regards taking care of people in the world, or helping people create what they want in the world. I think one thing that happened when you and I were chatting was that I think we saw each other, we recognized each other, and you and I are quite similar in the way that we integrate so many different things. We've had many different experiences, and we enjoy and seek ongoing new information, new ways of doing things. It's not I'll speak for myself for a moment. I don't ever want to stop and say, okay, I know enough now. That's not happening in my life. And I see that in you too. And I think that was another thing that we connected on. And I think it's very important for me in this role that I have that same spirit of continuing to want to expand, to do more, to integrate what's new, what's now, what do we know? Let's integrate that. So those are the things I see, and what I was thinking as I was learning about this position.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, a year later, you are also helping to teach some of the material for the IHP Mastery course. And that's really, that is the other half beyond the protocols, beyond the labs. It's, well, how do you get your wellness clients better results? And if you're a doctor going through the program, how do you get your patients better results? Using that active listening, using the accountability, talking with your patient or your wellness client about their end of the bargain and your end of the bargain. Like, what are you both doing? Like, who's responsible for what? And really taking ownership of your own health. So it has been a fun journey. But let's talk about the day-to-day. What are you helping the health coaches with? Because I know that you're connecting with them on a daily basis. I know that we get on a call twice a week to review different protocols and items like that. So what does that look like behind the scenes? Because I know that people are interested. They want to know, what does it look like to run this type of a practice? And it's a global practice. I mean, we're helping people all over the world on a daily basis. We
are. So first, to clarify, I am doing a very big full-time job now. So that part-time listing, before I even started, you decided to invite me to come on full-time right off the bat. So this is not a part-time side gig for me. This is what I do all the time, a lot. And I have turned my full attention to this. So what I do on a day-to-day basis is I oversee the labs. So that has to do with, as you mentioned, deciding what labs we're going to be offering, and then making sure that whole side of the service we offer is just working, and interfacing with the lab companies that are our partners to just make that whole thing work, and continuing to make sure we're staying abreast of what we want to be offering from an at-home lab perspective. With the coaching team, I do a number of things. So I am overseeing the practice, if you will. So we have a number of health coaches who are the people who, when a person buys an at-home lab test from the website, that always comes with a meeting with a health coach. That's one way that you might meet with a health coach, or you can sign up to meet with a health coach as you would in any other health coaching practice. You don't have to buy a lab in order to do that. So, but we have a team of health coaches who meet with clients all day long, every day. And I am overseeing that team from the perspective, number one, of just the technical, clinical, understanding labs, interpreting labs, making decisions about what we recommend for people, pitching in to help in any way that I need to with the nuts and bolts of that. Just basically, labs come in and we meet with clients and help them, give them a variety of suggestions, some of which include supplement protocols, but a lot of these other lifestyle and spiritual and 360 sorts of recommendations that we were alluding to a minute ago. Also, though, with the health coaching team, I serve as a mentor. We talked about the mastery course a little bit a minute ago. So this skill set that I bring that has to do with understanding communication styles, learning how to connect very effectively with people, developing yourself. I run meetings with our internal team where I essentially serve as the executive coach to those health coaches. And we meet every other week as a group to just focus on developing them as human beings and improve and work on their ability to communicate and connect with themselves, which ultimately, with each other, which ultimately means that they develop that skill to be even better with the clients. So that is something that I do. And then I also I do some of the more, all of the management, organizing, administrative things that you would think of as a person who runs a department. So that stuff not as interesting to talk about. But basically, I see myself, the things that I highlight and particularly love doing are all of the teaching and supervising and supporting of the coaching team. And then from the lab side, it's the ability to always be looking for what are we going to do next? How do we continue to grow our offerings and make what we're doing from the at-home lab testing perspective more, just more for our whole community? How can we continue to expand and improve what we offer?
Yeah, absolutely. And you really are doing a fantastic job at that. I know that in this specific role, and one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on the show is that, because a lot of people, when they hear this, they say, well, you went from a medical doctor to an MBA to all of these prestigious positions. But really, what you did was you took everything that you had learned over 30 years, essentially, and brought you to where you are today. And that's what I want people to know is like, you could be on this path. I'm sure at certain times in your life, you felt confused. You didn't know what you wanted to be doing. You didn't know where this was going to lead. And most people don't. But everything leads you to a position one day where you're like, oh, this makes sense. Now I understand why I became a medical doctor, why I didn't do these things, why I chose these specific things, how executive coaching now helps you to train our health coaches, which then works with thousands of people all over the world. And the shamanism is something that keeps you balanced. You have the analytical, medical background, and then you have more of the spiritual, energetic based side. And it really helps to achieve that equilibrium. And I wanted people to see that there are people in all different walks of life, and they're basically saying, this isn't for me, this isn't for me, this isn't for me. But you don't give up. And eventually you say, oh, that's why all of this happened. And that's why I really enjoyed hearing you share this story, much of which I actually didn't know all of that. So it was very, very helpful for me as well. And I know it'll be great for our community and our health coaches to hear besides our podcast community. Would love to see if you have, and we are, believe it or not, already at our time. I know that we could chat for at least another hour, 2 hours just on everything we're doing today and what's coming for the future too. So we'll have you back on, no doubt about it. I mean, you're also overseeing our brand new private health coaching app. I mean, so many different things that are happening.
Yeah, there's a lot of things we didn't go over.
Yeah, but I wanted you to be able to share your story. I love being able to hear the journey of how you arrived to where you are today. And of course, the journey continues to unfold. Any parting words you'd like to share with our community before we kind of connect you with where people can find you next?
Well, I guess my parting words would be that I see this role that I'm in as you just said, as this absolutely wonderful culmination of what I've been up to now in my life. And one of the things I'm so excited about in this role is that the spirit of this whole company, and you certainly, is about continuing to grow and evolve and expand. And so I didn't just get here and now I'm here. I'm here and now I get to continue to express that creativity, to look around and grow and shift. And I have the ability to do that in this role. And that's what's so exciting for me as a person. And what excites me about this company in the bigger picture is the spirit behind everything that we're doing. It's always focused on how can we serve and bring people's lives into their full fruition, really. But we do that. You do that, and I do that, and the company does that also in its each kind of fractal way. So I think that's a beautiful thing, and that's why I'm so excited to be right here where I am now.
Yeah, I mean, it is a great field, and there is no end to it. Like, that's the thing, is like, you're simply saying, I'm going to try to master the best of my ability, everything that's available now. Oh, and now we're going to stay current with the new state-of-the-art technologies to make sure that we're always providing the best of the best for people as well. One of those things that, people are really looking to connect with you and the health coaching team to learn more is a free lab selection call. I mean, that's really a nice way to say, I'm not feeling well in these specific areas. What functional medicine at-home lab do you think is best for me that I could find out a little bit more about myself from the inside out? And that is really where essentially your team shines. I mean, they're able to say, okay, I hear what you're going through. I've already worked with X number of people like you. This was most likely the condition in many of them. And here's what we found in a lab. I would like to do the same for you if you're interested. And that's been something new that really has been developed with yourself and the team. And I just think it's one of the best offerings out there that anybody could move forward with.
Yeah, thank you for remembering and reminding me to mention that, because I do think that it's something I'm really quite proud of, and I'm happy to see how successful it's been. So yes, the lab selection call is an opportunity to speak with one of our coaches one-on-one, to go over exactly what you just described, to go over whatever's going on with you, to help you choose the right lab or labs for you to buy. And we set it up in a way where you pay a nominal amount of money to do the call, but then you get all of that money right back when you, as a coupon, when you buy whatever lab you're buying. So it's a very low risk, easy way to, first of all, get to know what our coaches are like. And second of all, to get some very, very good guidance on how to wisely and most efficiently spend that money that you're investing in your health with our labs. So thank you for bringing that up and reminding me about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like I said, that is a service that I believe sets EquiLife apart, is being able to say, how can we serve first before saying, okay, we're going to implement this particular lab or whatever it might be. And I think another thing to mention is that the labs that we use, you and I both say, okay, this is the right lab. We actually ended up choosing a new bacteria and parasite stool testing lab. And we said, okay, these are the best ones, but we don't own any of these labs. I mean, that is not part of what we do. We simply partner with the best of the best. And that's part of our philosophy, is bringing in all sorts of great people with different viewpoints and different vantage points. And that's always been the growth-based model, is bring in really great people, really great companies to work with, and we move fast. And so I think that's part of the fun as well. So
absolutely part of the fun.
Thank you so much for being on the Conversations with Cabral today. Really was great to have you on. Where can people find you on social media and connect?
So on Facebook, it's Doc Jennifer, DOC Jennifer, and Instagram is drdr.jennifer. That's my handle on Instagram.
Excellent. So we'll definitely connect those on the show notes page today. Again, really appreciate you being on the show with me here today and sharing your story with our community. Thank you, and take care.
You're most welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks again.